Hi everyone. As you're probably all aware, students have come back to campus all over the country over the last 2 to 3 weeks, and the academic year has officially started. Evidence has shown that there is an increasing number of students that are engaging in sex work. That is because tuition fees are horrendous at the moment, and there's just not enough funding opportunities for many students to finance their living costs as well as their tuition. So a lot of people are going to turn to sex work. This year, everything is obviously very certain on campus with coronavirus and all the measures that universities have implemented to be handling the situations. And this affects especially student sex workers. So if you are a student sex worker, if you're first year, in your first year, second year, or anywhere in your degree and you do sex work, we do recommend that you check out our previous webinars on how to work safely during COVID. And there's also some other resources that are already out there on how to work safely and where you can access financial support if you cannot work because of the coronavirus situation. So in this very short webinar, we would like to add a few things that might be specifically important for student sex workers, such as being out in academic institutions and what to consider with that when you talk about your sex work experience. And we also want to give you some tips on how to do sex work activism on campus. And finally, we will say a few things about a student sex work toolkit that has just been published. Right, let's do this.
Hi everyone. So first off, some of the big issues that student sex workers face and how you're going to deal with them. So on how you're going to deal with them. So on the left-hand side, you're going to see some of the issues that that student sex workers face, and on the right-hand side, you've got different ways we cope. So the first ones we're really commonly encountering is people being in a new city, the lack of support network. There's quite a lot of isolation when you're starting to get into a city to study. Maybe you're not aware of the support that's out there. So one of the great ways of dealing with this is to start digging in, start seeing where the student sex work community is in your area, find them online, especially, if you're feeling like you can't talk to the university about it, you can start searching online. And the fact is that the sex work community is now networking more and more. So actually, if there's not something there, actually you might be able to provide something that can help someone else in a similar situation, because it's very likely that there's people in the same sort of situation. When it comes to not knowing the lack of when it comes to knowing whether your work is legal or not, there are some local support projects that will be able to help with more information on this. So again, the situation of sex workers not knowing if their work is breaking a law or not, it's really good to sort of dig into that again and to starting to look into what the legal frameworks in the UK and general safety tips on that, because these aren't questions that you should be afraid to ask. Actually, the answers are out there, and there's people that have asked these questions already and can sort of hold your hand a little bit through this. One of the big issues faced is living in shared accommodation, like in halls of residence or just a student flat share. If you're seeing clients, are other people in your flat comfortable with you having clients coming in, and these sorts of things? There's a lot more negotiation when you're sharing a living space. So there's a few other ways of sex work that you could consider. So maybe you could consider stripping, or you could do types of porn, online cam work, maybe brothel work or out calls. So there's other forms of sex work which obviously I'm not recommending, but I'm saying that there's other ways where you don't have to negotiate that situation of your living with your flatmates. One of the big fears when it comes to students is being afraid of being kicked out of uni, especially when it comes to things like social care, medicine, nursing, probably some of the teaching subjects. These sort of sectors can be a little bit delicate when it comes to talking about sex work. It's when it comes to these issues, get to know your organizations that can stand up for your rights. Get to know you can seek support from some of these groups. Again, there's people that are there that are happy to stand for your rights. If you need to keep things more discreet, then be aware of things like NUM. NUM has alerts, and you can check out local services through things like NUM. But if you're needing to keep your clientele like really secret, then there's tools there that can help you do that, and do that still in a safer way. So be aware of those tools, be aware of things like what NUM's offering. If you're outed at any point by something like the university, or getting to a paper or something, again, go to these groups, say what's happened, and get some support, because the support's out there. You're not alone in going through this. Obviously, the fear of stigmatization sort of impacts all of this and makes people feel a lot more like alone, and they're going to be badly treated. And sometimes people are badly treated, but you've also got friends around you. There is solidarity. There's groups and there's projects you should be aware of. Projects like the Student Sex Work Project from 2015. They found that less than 15% thought that universities were doing enough. And even the student unions were providing sufficient support for student sex workers. So with findings like that, actually there's people trying to fill the gap and trying to make sure that there's support services there. You're not alone in this. Lots of sex workers are students, and they'll be working in similar ways that you've been working. So hang in there.
Right, on the topic of being outed or deciding to be out at university or in academic institutions, that can be a really difficult decision to make because of the stigma, but it can also sometimes make it easier for you if you don't have to hide that part of your life. It is therefore important that you make a plan for yourself and consider who you want to know in the first place. So how about your close friends? How about the people that you live with in dorms or also in other living arrangements? What about your lecturers, and also what about your supervisors, both your dissertation supervisor and your academic supervisor? So have a think about if you want them to know and how you would want to tell them. There are a few questions to ask yourself when you decide when to out yourself. So the first one is how out you are outside of your university. So like, does it affect your life outside of university, outside of your degree? Do your friends outside of university know? Does your family know? Stuff like that, because it might get out from university if you are out at university. The other thing is, do you show your face online? Like, do you if you do any online content creation or something like that, is your face visible on that? Or do you have ads online somewhere that show your face? But also, do you work in any establishments like strip clubs or brothels that potentially your peers, also your lecturers could visit and see you there? Or are there any other ways that people could find out about your sex working identity by being clients? So just consider that, consider how visible you are to the public, which obviously includes your lecturers. Another thing to consider is whether your supervisor, lecturer, also your tutors, like anyone who is, like any staff members at universities, how they stand in terms of sex work. So sometimes it's quite difficult to find out, but some people will have published about sex work before, or will have put out any like blog posts, articles, something like that, where they kind of state where they stand with sex work, because of course there are some people who are very much against and for the abolishment of any kind of sex work. While other people who might also be your supervisors are very supportive and do support the decriminalization of sex work. And just being aware of that kind of helps you to decide if you want them to know, and you can also kind of assess how they will react to you telling them about it. There is a chance that you will be outed by someone else, even if you decide that you don't want to be out at university at all. There's still a chance that somebody that you could be outed through a client who who is angry for some reason, or who is just not a nice person, and makes sure that your university knows about it. It could be a friend, it could be an ex-partner. There's a lot of situations where people could just find out about your sex work, and that could make the round at university. So try to be as prepared for that as possible. Of course, that can be a really dire and really shit situation, but just try to have a support structure in place if possible, and make sure that you are connected to other sex workers, because as it's been mentioned earlier, you are not the only one. There is lots of student sex workers out there, and a lot of student sex workers have gone through this being outed process and have dealt with it. So make sure you are connected with other people that have gone through this. there's a little bit specifically for undergraduates. So like if you are doing your undergraduate in whatever year, do consider that if you are being out about your sex work at university, that might potentially impact your life after your degree, especially if you're not sure yet what you're going to do, if you're going to go on for a master's or if you're going to go into some kind of career outside of sex work. It just might impact that if you have been out at university. For postgraduate researchers, there's two things. So with researching sex work, if you do decide to do a research project for your master dissertation or also for your PhD that is specifically on sex work, you do obviously have to make the decision if you want to be out as a researcher. Do you want to show in your publications that you are a sex worker and that you have lived experience, or do you want to do it as a researcher who looks at it from the outside? There is similar things to consider, just like with outing at university in general. You will have to handle the stigma in the research community that is evidently there if you do out yourself, but also having lived experience can be an asset for you in research projects. So just it's just another decision to make. If you have a supervisor who is generally cool with the topic, maybe have a chat with them, because that is literally what they're there for. And then just a super quick note about teaching assistants. So if you do teach at university as a PhD student, you might have to be a little bit more careful with being face out, because obviously some of your students could potentially find your ad or find you, and that might create very difficult situations that you would have to handle. Generally, your GTA coordinator should support you if something like that happens, but I cannot promise you that your GTA coordinator will be super cool with that. Generally, yeah, just be, I would also like to point out that it is not impossible to be a GTA and a sex worker at the same time. However, you do need to be really careful of where you out yourself and how openly you do sex work, because your students might find out, and also your colleagues at university might find out, and that could potentially create even more difficult situations than you would have as an undergraduate student.
Okay, so we have got, thankfully, there is a precedent for advocating for the decriminalisation of sex work on campus. There are sex working community groups on some campuses that you can join, or you can make one if you're feeling particularly keen. So we have various student unions have already published policies on sex work going back to about 2014. Most of them advocating for full decriminalisation of sex work and more support for student sex workers. So we have copies of all of these policies. They will be in a link in the description box. So if you want your student union at your university to support sex works, you can write to them. You can present policies from these other universities. You can introduce a motion to be voted on at your next AGM at your student union. As of May 2020, we haven't found any evidence of university policy on student sex work. So there is a difference between student union policies and university policies. So right now we haven't found any from universities. We have found a few from student unions. However, we have got links to toolkits that are available for staff as well as for students. So we have these resources ready for you if you wanted to do, you know, a little bit of activism on your own campus and help support sex workers that way.
And finally, as we've already mentioned, the Student Sex Work Toolkit, it has just been released, and it's a useful document where you can find the tips for beginner sex workers on how to keep safe while working, while choosing the way to work, and it does describe some potential situations and some ways of working that, reading about them, you can decide they're better for you than others. There are also a few paragraphs about the current legislation in the UK so that you can see how legal the mode of work that you choose will be. There are tips on how to access support, as well as a list of sex worker-led organizations in the UK, their websites, what services they provide, and some of the organizations in the UK that provide services to sex workers. And that can be anything from sexual health services to support, condoms, taking reports of violence against you, counseling, and other things. You will find the link to the toolkit under the video, and as we mentioned, there is a similar toolkit for staff, which if you're a staff at the university, you should probably have a look at it. And because we haven't mentioned it in a while, NAM Casework team are available to support you with almost anything you may need around sex work. These days, the Casework team members are available from 9 a.m. till 5 p.m. Monday to Friday. And if you want to speak to somebody on the phone rather than email them, please check National Ugly Mug's Twitter. They will usually have updates on who exactly is on the phone and at what time. And please remember that if you're really struggling right now, you can always call our caseworkers for a food voucher. And it is very easy to claim, very easy to get, and you will get some food. So keep yourself full, stay safe, look after yourself, and we will see you soon.